Excellent. Welcome everybody today to this incredible event. We're so happy to see so many people out on this rooftop. It's a lovely day. We finally got some shade. Earlier we had some sun, but now we've got some really great shade for us, keeping us nice and cool at today's fundraiser coming together, just really celebration of all of the work that CovertAction Magazine has been doing, has done in the past, and is going to continue to do. So with that, I want to open up today's event with somebody who, in some ways, doesn't really need an introduction in so many ways. But I will give him an introduction because there is so much incredible work that this man has done, not only for CovertAction Magazine, but for our movements overall, and just in general, his contribution to journalism and to the struggle goes without saying. So I'm introducing Philip Agee. Philip Agee. He is the executive editor of CovertAction Magazine. He holds advanced degrees in sociology and history with an emphasis in U.S. foreign and domestic policy, political economy, social movements, and social change. I mean, Agee teaches a number of classes. He's been an activist and a journalist for so many years. I really could keep going on, but let's let him speak. So please give it up for Chris.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for coming out for this CAM. 44 years, can you believe? 44 years in activity and exposing the crimes of the U.S. government and plutocrats worldwide. We have a great lineup of speakers today. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Is everybody, we all good? Hello? Should I talk more into it? Okay. Oh, maybe you got to talk right like this. Okay. Today we wake up in a country where the U.S. Supreme Court, as of yesterday, outlaws the right for women to choose their own paths for reproductive health. We have journalists and whistleblowers and social justice activists like Julian Assange, Daniel Hale, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier, sitting in prison. Last week, Julian was stripped naked and thrown into a bare cell in a maximum security prison on suicide watch, while criminals whose crimes he reported on are going free. Investigative journalism outlets like Consortium News and Mint Press are getting their funding vehicles shut down for exposing NATO aggression that led to the war in Ukraine. Potential world war and nuclear catastrophe as Russia and China challenge U.S. hegemony. We have institutionalized racism. We have gross inequality and class conflict on the rise, coupled with the environmental catastrophe through unbridled capitalism, galloping towards species extinction. We have a select committee in Congress investigating the insurrectionist fascist movement that could potentially take control of U.S. imperialism in the coming years. We need investigative journalism to expose and analyze all these calamities we are facing. And we need to develop innovative communication strategies to penetrate into social media where many get their world views. The very survival of humanity is at stake. Every time I think about these issues and their causes, it leads me to think about capitalism, an economic system seeking profit and plunder and imperialism, its logical conclusion. That's why we need to expose and oppose covert action, the tools that imperialism and plutocrats worldwide use to subvert, oppress, and destroy internationalism and movements that advocate a more sustainable and equitable society. Acknowledge, okay, all the folks that are involved in this work. So let me give a special shout out to Louis Wolff. Come on, let's give a round of applause to Louis Wolff. Louis Wolff, who has been working on this magazine and doing this kind of work all his entire life. And he walked up to my father one day in, what was it, I wish he was here. He was supposed to be here, but he's at home for health issues. So it must have been in around 1976 or 77. They got together and they can you imagine, sat down at a bench in DuPont Square, right, and said, or DuPont Circle, I guess it's called down in D.C., hey, how about we put together a newsletter, you know, and we exposed these activities. So they got together with people like Bill Schaap, Ellen Ray, Michael Ratner, and all the folks that have worked on the magazine over the past 44 years. Again, Lou Wolf has been and still going strong all these years. We have here today Jeremy Kuzmarov. Where are you, Jeremy? There he is. Jeremy Kuzmarov, the managing editor, who writes and edits articles at an amazing quality and an amazing clip. We have Michael Locker. Where are you, Michael? Michael Locker. There he is. He is our stalwart lion on the board that helps keep us honest and going in the right direction. We have Bill Montrose, who is not here today, but Bill, who painstakingly proofs and fact checks each and every article. It's amazing, his capacity. Let's give a round of applause for Bill Montrose. Hi, Bill. And then, of course, we have others on the editorial board. We have Sam Alcoff, who is here. Where are you, Sam? Sam Alcoff, who from Democracy Now! We have Steve Brown. Steve Brown, I think Steve Brown is here. Josh Klein, where are you? Oh, Josh is probably downstairs letting more people in, right? And who's going to take over from Josh? I guess it's going to be Sam. Sam is going to take over, and then later John, right? Okay. Now, and then, of course, we have Rachel Hugh here, right here. Let's give a round of applause for Rachel Hugh. And Chris Garaffa, who's on the technology over here. My gosh, Chris has set up, in a matter of an hour or so, a worldwide broadcast of this event, which is truly amazing. And Rachel and Chris, of course, are newest recruits who bring fresh young energy and political acumen. They have launched our new podcast and radio show called CovertAction Bulletin, which I encourage everyone to become a patron by going to patreon.com/covert at 9 a.m. on Wednesdays, right after Democracy Now! And it's syndicated throughout the Pacifica Network. Okay, I'm going to try to get through this quick because we have a couple of more people to thank. First of all, I want to thank our speakers for coming. That's, of course, let's give them all a round of applause at one go. Thank you very much. We've got Abby Martin, right? We've got Gloria LaRiva, John Kiriakou, all right, and Christian Parenti, Ray McGovern, Aaron Matei, and who's the last one here? Oh, and of course, Jeff Young is here. Jeff Young, let's give a round of applause for Jeff Young. And can you believe it, Jeff Young, running for Congress, who recently won the Democratic primary in Kentucky? On the following main issue, can you believe it? Abolish the CIA. On that issue. Okay. Of course, and we have an advisory board, too numerous to mention here, but with whom we seek guidance as often as we can. I would like to thank my wife, Victoria, who helped with the food and actually put all that wonderful food together with our two children, Maya, who is here, and Juan, and whose support and constructive criticism help guide me through all this work every day, and they keep me honest. All our donors and subscribers, thank you, who keep this magazine going. Let's give a round of applause. That's what really keeps this going. Everyone who came out in person today, thank you, and all those watching on Facebook and YouTube. And I also want to give out, lastly, a shout out to Dan Ellsberg. Let's give him a round of applause, Dan Ellsberg. Dan Ellsberg was supposed to speak here today, but he actually last week fell and got a concussion. So we wish him well, and we even encourage folks, if they can, to reach out to him and wish him well. But he said he ain't done yet.
All right.
Okay. So how's my time going, by the way? A little bit more? Okay. So 44 years ago, my father, CIA whistleblower Philip Agee, co-founded CovertAction Information Bulletin, later renamed CovertAction Quarterly. Together with Bill Schaap, Ellen Ray, Lewis Wolf, Michael Ratner, William Kunstler, and Mel Wolf, and numerous others, built a hell of a magazine, okay, exposing the crimes of the CIA, including its sources and methods. Originally, CAM was a watchdog, a journal that focused on the abuses and the activities of the CIA. But over the years, the magazine has developed a following, not as a conspiracy theory publication, but as a source for reliable, consistent, and accurate investigative reporting. They also had a naming names column. You remember the naming names column? In other words, let's name those CIA agents. Let's call them out. And of course, this created great controversy and led to the Congress and the President passing the Intelligence Identities Protection Act in 1981. So that column had to be stopped. Now, when the magazine was founded in 1978, I think I was like 14 years old, and I was hired to do the mail. Right, I was the guy who came in, and I thought, oh, here's my fancy little job. I get to go do the mail, and I had no idea what was going on. I just knew I had learned about internationalism, you know, because my father had invited me to Cuba a year earlier, and I went there into what is called the World Youth International Festival, and I learned about internationalism, and I thought, wow, what is that? And I learned it's about love. It's about loving other people. It's about having and being supportive to people, both in your own communities as well as internationally. So I had a sense of what the magazine was up to, and of course I had lived through living on the run with my father, where we had I went to more schools than there are grades in half a dozen countries, and so it all led to I ended up focusing on a career and looking at social movements and how we can change the work that the CIA is doing and the U.S. imperialism. But I did want to tell you a story. When the magazine was being run out of my office in the late 1990s and early 2000s, one late night we were Bill and Ellen and I and Lou and some others. We were drinking. We were enjoying this nice bottle of red wine, and I said to Ellen, it must have been in the early 2000s, like right around the Patriot Act, and I was like, Ellen, Bill, don't you think that we need to train and recruit like younger folks to continue this great work? And Ellen she didn't flinch a bit. She just goes, Chris, you want another glass of wine? So it's like it never really happened. So what we need to do is continue this work, and we need to do it in more innovative ways, reaching people in areas where they are actually reading and watching, right? Things like TikTok. We need to get to innovative media. But it's great that we're doing what we're doing, but we need to also reach out to those other areas. Now, let me see here. Over the past 5 years, we have nurtured an evolving new and younger group of dedicated folks who have rebuilt the magazine, placing it online and soliciting articles from a generation of authors who are dedicated to extending my father's anti-imperialist, and yeah, I'll say it, pro-socialist legacy. Altogether, the expanded team specializes in a variety of issues, social justice issues including intervention, war, covert action, intelligence, political economy, imperialism, labor, repression, surveillance, media, racial justice, sexism, environmentalism, and immigration. We can keep going on that list, right? Well, anyway, I have more to say, but it's really an honor, really deeply, and a pleasure to be with you all today and to celebrate the great work of this magazine and, of course, promote it moving forward. We need it all the more. All right? So on that, let me introduce our next speaker, John Kiriakou, who John actually wrote the first article that we went online for with. It was on Bloody Gina Haspel. Okay, let me get to my bio. Oh yeah, you were the first one we reached out to. Let me see here if I can find your bio here. So John Kiriakou was a CIA analyst and case officer from 1990 to 2004. In December 2007, John was the first U.S. government official to confirm that waterboarding was used to interrogate al-Qaeda prisoners, a practice he described as torture. Kiriakou was a former senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and a former counterterrorism consultant. While employed with the CIA, he was involved in critical counterterrorism missions following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, but refused to be trained in so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, nor did he ever authorize or engage in such crimes. After leaving the CIA, Kiriakou appeared on ABC News in an interview with Brian Ross, during which he became the first former CIA officer to confirm the existence of CIA torture programs. Kiriakou's interview revealed that this practice was not just the result of a few rogue agents, but was the official U.S. policy approved at the highest government levels. Kiriakou is the sole CIA agent to go to jail in connection with the U.S. torture program, despite the fact that he never tortured anyone. Rather, he blew the whistle on this horrific wrongdoing. And let's give a round of applause for John.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Very happy to be here today. Very happy to be here with Chris, and to be associated, of course, with CovertAction Magazine. I'll do it a little closer. I have a short period of time, so I want to talk in that. What do I have? 10 minutes. I want to talk in that 10 minutes about my awakening as to covert action. When I joined the CIA, I was a young 24, 25 years old. I was an analyst, didn't really know much about what the CIA did on the operational side. And then years later, I switched over to operations to do counterterrorism overseas. I came back to CIA headquarters and I got a job in a cubicle, in a cubicle farm with 300 other people in this giant room. There was an older officer who would come in every day, was very friendly, and every morning he would walk in and say, "Morning, guys," and we would say, "Morning, Rick." And this went on for months. "How was your weekend, guys?" "Good, Rick. How was your weekend?" "Oh, it was great." Finally, I said to the guy that sat next to me, he's the nicest guy. He comes in every day and says good morning, and I don't have any idea what he does here. And my friend said, "John, he's the head of the Special Activities Division." I said, "Well, what the heck does that spell?" "Oh, right. So that's why he disappears for 2 weeks at a time." He said, "Yeah, he'll jet to some other country, shoot someone in the head, and then come back and say, 'Morning, guys.' Like, everything's fine." I was disturbed by that, but I went about my business. Then September 11th happened. Like everybody else in the building, I volunteered to go to Afghanistan. My Arabic was excellent. And I thought, surely they need somebody to do the translations for all these people that they're catching. And they kept turning me down. 3 times they turned me down. In the meantime, I run into an old-timer in the hall with whom I had served in the Middle East. And I said, "Billy, where you been?" I hadn't seen him in 6 or 8 weeks. "Where have you been?" He said, in a whisper, "I've been in Afghanistan." I said, "Really? What are you doing in Afghanistan?" He said, "I've been killing people. What do you think I've been doing?" And I said, "That's why they haven't sent me. They don't need translators. They're not interviewing anybody. They're just killing them." I finally went to Pakistan as the head of CIA counterterrorism operations. My job was to capture as many al-Qaeda fighters, and especially al-Qaeda leaders, as possible, and then send them to we didn't know where. So 2 things happened in that during that tour. One, we actually filled the jail in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, with Arabs. It was full. Couldn't take any more prisoners. So I called headquarters. And I said, "The jail's full. The Pakistanis want them out. What do I do with all these guys?" And they said, "Put them on a C-12 and send them to Guantanamo." And I said, "Guantanamo, Cuba?" "Yes." I said, why would we send them to Cuba?" "Well, we're only going to have them there for 2 or 3 weeks until we decide what federal court to charge them in, and then we'll send them to Boston, New York, or Washington." I said, "Oh, that's a great idea. Okay." Not realizing that the discussion at the CIA was different from the discussion at the Justice Department. The discussion at the CIA was nobody's ever going to see the inside of a courtroom, ever. Another thing that happened that changed me at the CIA was the night that we captured Abu Zubaydah, who we believed at the time was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. It was the night of March 28th, 2002, changed the course of the rest of my life. We caught dozens of other Al-Qaeda fighters that night. But we did one raid. We did 14 raids simultaneously that night. One of those raids was a mistake. There was a house in a neighborhood that had been making calls, or from which calls were being made to Al-Qaeda leaders. It turned out it was the only house in the neighborhood that had a phone. And so Al-Qaeda people were stopping by saying, hey, can I make a call? I'll give you 5 rupees. The guy said, sure, come on in. We broke down his door at 2 o'clock in the morning and we grabbed him, 82-year-old man, and his 2 sons. When my colleagues brought him to our safe house, or brought the 3 of them to our safe house to be interrogated, they had hoods on. And I said, why are they hooded? Remember, I'm the boss. I'm the chief. I said, why are they hooded? Well, we don't want them to see our faces. I said, are you seriously telling me that none of you have ever read the Geneva Convention? Seriously? It's a war crime to put hoods on them. Take the hoods off. And this one idiot said, if you take the hood off, I'm going to report you to headquarters. I said, oh, I'm going to report you to headquarters for committing a war crime. And I pulled the hoods off. I ended up apologizing to this old man. I said to the Pakistanis, what can I do to make this right? They said, well, you can buy him a new door, first of all. The door was in splinters. And I gave him $150. And the next day he was on TV saying, the Americans broke down my door, and they grabbed me, and they grabbed my sons. But they were very friendly. And they gave us $150, and we bought new shoes. I mean, this is the level that we're dealing with. They bought new shoes with their money and a door. I went back to headquarters about 6 weeks later, and I heard someone behind my back refer to me as the human rights guy. Oh, that's the human rights guy. And I chuckled. I said to a friend of mine, I was walking in the hall, I said, did you hear that? They call me the human rights guy. And he said, yeah, that's not a compliment.
What?
And then I got, it's not a compliment. And then I was passed over for promotion. I've just captured the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. And I'm passed over for promotion. And a friend of mine who happened to be a CIA psychiatrist said, I don't think you understand. You don't fit in here. This really isn't for you. And he was right. You know, once I got to that level, and the world of covert action was opened to me, 90% of the time I would think or say to colleagues, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard of. Or 10% of the time I'd say, you know that's an international crime, right? You can't do that. You can't overthrow a government because you don't like their politics, which of course we do all the time. But you can't do that. You're not supposed to. And so covert action became something completely different for me. You know, we study things like the theft of the Italian election of 1949, or the overthrow of the Iranian government in 1953, or the overthrow of Salvador Allende. But it's not just historical. These things are happening still today. And I've always maintained that the American people own this information. The American people have a right to know what their employees, their CIA employees, are doing in their name. And if that means a felony charge, then that's the fight we have to fight. I think my 10 minutes are up. Thank you for being here. This is an amazing cause, a great magazine. It's all my pleasure.
What a wonderful, incredible walk through his journey that we just got from John. I mean, there's so many incredible speakers today. I could not be more excited to hear from more of them. So I do not want to draw this out. And without further ado, I want to bring on our next speaker, somebody who I personally am very inspired by, who has some incredible work and some incredible stories to share. We're going to be hearing from Gloria LaRiva. Gloria LaRiva has been an activist since becoming a student at Brandeis University 50 years ago. She has been involved in the anti-war and anti-racist movement as a member of the Answer Coalition. She was the coordinator of the National Committee to Free the Cuban Five, the men who were railroaded into U.S. prison for 16 years for protecting their country from U.S.-sponsored terrorism. Phil Agee was a solid supporter of the Cuban Five, and he was featured in the documentary Mission Against Terror. Gloria was also awarded Cuba's Friendship Medal in 2010, approved by the Council of State, the 60th Anniversary Medal of the Federation of Cuban Women, and the 60th Anniversary Medal of the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples for her years of Cuba Solidarity work. For 10 years, she was also the president of the Bay Area Typographical Union, and she retired after working 36 years at the San Francisco Chronicle. She is currently first vice president of the Pacifica Media Workers Guild at CWA. She was also the presidential candidate in 2016 and 2020 for the Party for Socialism and Liberation and for the Peace and Freedom Party in California. And finally, the last bit I will share with you about Gloria is her incredible work as a journalist as well. In years ago, she was with Ramsey Clark 10 days during the U.S. NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, and she also produced the film NATO Targets Venezuela. Without further ado, I'm going to give it for Gloria LaRiva.
Thank you, Rachel. Actually, I added that part about Yugoslavia, and as usual, I sometimes confuse Venezuela with Yugoslavia by the length of the name. The video is called NATO Targets Yugoslavia, not Venezuela, even though they're trying. It's really an honor to meet Chris. I've read Covert Action for so long, and I just admire Chris, and I knew of him. I have several friends in Cuba who served as double agents for Cuba, recruited by the CIA, but actually working many years for Cuba, state security. And I visited one of my friends, Dr. Eduardo Sagaro, who amazingly passed 3 lie detector tests that the CIA conducted, and for years, did his exemplary work for Cuba. And when I saw him last year, he gave me a gift, and it was the book by Philip Agee, On the Run. And I got to know of Chris and Phil's sons, who went with him on all these adventures, but also, had to get pulled out of schools and live in New York and then go back to Europe. And I just said, these kids were something. And so I'm really honored to meet them for the legacy that you're continuing. It's very critical. As probably everyone here knows, the CIA not only has these dastardly actions and operations that John just mentioned all over the world, but also the propaganda war in our own country. And part of that is the creation, the cultural war, there's books written about it, the cultural war against socialism by creating and recruiting people who were well-known artists, intellectuals, as an anti-communist left of the United States. And they were financed in order to do anything to say, well, you may be an activist from the 40s, 50s, 60s on to the present, but, socialism is really a lie. And so covert action is not part of that crew, never has been, because Philip Agee was a socialist. There's only 2 systems possible in the world. And that is either the wealth that the people create, the workers, everything we know in New York and anywhere, created by the workers, either it's owned in common by the people for the benefit of all, or it's owned by a handful that's getting tinier and tinier, who are the real dictatorship, who decide when a factory gets shut down, or when uranium mining will take place in the Black Hills of South Dakota against Native people, all for war. And so I really, really salute Covert Action, the young people here, Rachel and Chris, and many more that will join. And I want to say, last night I marched for almost 5 hours with the youth. There were a few of us older people. And it was very hard to keep it, but we did. Against the abomination called the Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court was just doing everything in record time to turn back whatever the people have fought for since the 30s. And they're not done. As that unbelievable concurring opinion of Clarence Thomas saying, well, why stop there? It's incumbent upon us to even challenge and overturn the right to same-sex, not even like same-sex marriage, but same-sex marriage, trans right, and contraceptives, which they already ruled on with Hobby Lobby case a number of years ago. So we have a real challenge. The war after World War II, I ask young people now, who was the victor in World War II? The more conscious ones say the Soviet Union. I say, no, the victor was the United States, because they came out virtually unscathed. And their plan was dominate the world economically, politically, militarily. And they haven't stopped since then. And that's why I think with the exposure of the history of the U.S. Rescuing the Nazis from Germany and Ukraine, rehabilitating them, the history that's needed from before February 24th to understand really what is going on. That is what's covered in Covert Action. There's another issue that is dear to my heart, and that is the struggle of Cuba. Last year, there's many people I know, Bernadette and Chuck are here. They went to Cuba with me a few years ago. And everybody who goes is like, this is marvelous. Yes, it's a very hardship that the people are experiencing. But July 11, when those disturbances took place suddenly, and it got enormous news coverage in the U.S. last year, when people were protesting in the street, and it was the point of coverage for quite a few days in the United States. All my friends were calling and saying, Gloria, what's going on? What didn't we know? And it turns out that one of the leaders of those disturbances, taking advantage of a very hard time for Cuba, 60 years of blockade, and 2 years of pandemic, when the number one source of income, their tourism, had to be shut down to save lives. It was a double blow to Cuba during those 2 years in order to save the people of Cuba while they're developing their own vaccine. But the CIA took advantage of those days and said, now's the time. The cases are going up because they hadn't finished vaccinating everybody. Now they have. And so they decided, we will take advantage of this time. Well, one of those youth recruited by the CIA was about to start another demonstration on November 15, the day that tourism was going to open up in Cuba, the day that all children would have completed their vaccination, the day of Cuba's opening and victory over COVID. And this young man said, I'm going to march on that day. We are tired of socialism. We're going to march. We're going to have people going down the street and demand a real change. And then a few days before that, on Cuban television, this doctor, this humble Cuban doctor, Carlos Leonardo Vasquez, said, I have a story to tell on national TV. He said, I have been recruited by the CIA, and I've been side by side with this young man, Junior Garcia, this artist, this theater drama writer, whatever you call it, playwright. And he said, and he's been trained in Eastern Europe, trying to recruit Cuban military to try to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. And this doctor was doing this for 20 years. That's the story of many Cubans who are protecting their country against the U.S. CIA. But we, in addition to promoting and supporting covert action today and always, we must remember that it's upon us as the people of the United States to fight the U.S. blockade, the greatest crime. It's a crime against humanity of 60 years, because the U.S. cannot stand to see a country that provides a real example, where women have the right to abortion on demand for free whenever. and free health care and child care and paternity and maternity leave for a year paid. So I'll stop there. I think I've definitely talked too much. But I just want to say, I am so honored to meet you, Chris, and to know you again some more. Thank you very much.
So, next up. Thank you. Thank you, Gloria. That was such a powerful talk. Thank you. To think that, Cuba is a place where you get universal education, healthcare, just 90 miles south, or even if you go north to Canada. What's happening in this country? It's crazy. All right, so our next speaker is Aaron Mattei. Aaron Mattei is a Canadian journalist and a reporter for The Grey Zone. He is a former producer of Democracy Now! And a contributor to The Nation and Real Clear Politics. He hosts the Pushback with Aaron Mattei, on The Grey Zone, as of January 2022, fills in as host on the Useful Idiots podcast. I hope your bio is still up to date.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here and to be among a panel of speakers whose work has really inspired and informed the work that I do. So it's a real honor, so thank you. I was speaking recently to a journalist who's been in the field for many decades, and he was telling me, I'll start again. I was speaking the other day to a journalist who's been in the field for a very, very long time, and he was telling me that journalism has never been worse. And that is ominous at a time when the world is in a very, very dark place. When the world is in a dark place, which it always is, we need journalism to shine a light on the darkness. But right now we're at a stage where so much journalistic energy is devoted to being enveloped by the darkness, to actually making the darkness even larger. And what's the ultimate example of that right now? Well, we all know it. It's the persecution and torture of Julian Assange, the person who has done more than anybody else on this planet to inform us about humanity's darkness, is being targeted with a just unthinkable campaign of harassment, torture, legal jeopardy, to the point where he now faces extradition to the U.S. for the mere act of exposing some of the worst state crimes that humanity has ever seen, including the illegal invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And what is our media doing in response to the assault on Julian Assange? Well, it borders between tolerance and even outright support. You've seen people who call themselves journalists in the corporate media applaud the persecution of Julian Assange. And otherwise, and I'd say even more dangerously, corporate journalists have given their tacit consent for Assange's torture by simply ignoring it and not protesting the multiple stages of just malice that have been exposed. I mean, we all know them. The fraudulent rape case in Sweden when there was no allegation of rape. All of the legal shenanigans that kept him caged in the Ecuadorian embassy, pressuring and threatening the Ecuadorian government to withdraw its asylum. Secretly plotting, as we know from leaks from the CIA, to kill, poison, kidnap Julian. And none of these revelations have received front-page headlines. What does receive front-page headlines when it comes to Julian is when they're trying to accuse him of being a Kremlin asset, based on the same deceptions that were used to put him in the embassy and in prison in the first place. So that's where we're at. And so accordingly, that participation in a campaign against this hero is reflected in the coverage of all the kinds of stories that Julian Assange has exposed. So, for example, when the U.S. government engages in a multi-billion-dollar dirty war in Syria, one of the most expensive covert action operations in U.S. history, rivaling the operation in Afghanistan, U.S. media just will not give you the countervailing facts. And that's because, unfortunately, we have a system where so many people who have called themselves journalists have come to identify with the people who they should be exposing. And unfortunately, that mindset has had a large impact, and it actually extends even beyond corporate media. You have a situation now where outlets that are traditionally progressive and adversarial have also been duped into going along with the establishment narratives that they used to oppose. I'll give a personal example. Just this past week, The Guardian of the UK, traditionally associated with the liberal left in the UK, came out with an article that labeled me the biggest spreader of disinformation on Syria. That's an honor that I was bestowed upon by the Guardian of London, and their source for that is a study from something called the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, which they don't tell their audience is actually a think tank funded by the U.S., the UK, and multiple other governments that were belligerents in the dirty war in Syria. They also didn't contact me for comment to see my response to being designated that. And they also didn't identify a single piece of disinformation that I've spread. And that's because the study that they're parroting doesn't identify a single case of disinformation that I've spread either, because they can't. Their aim and their sole aim is to silence and taint journalism on Syria. In this case, journalism that exposes a major deception where the OPCW, the world's top chemical weapons watchdog, was compromised to essentially falsely accuse Syria of committing chemical attacks and accordingly justify U.S. military strikes and sanctions on Syria that resulted. And I've been covering that extensively because I've gotten leaks from inside the OPCW, and those leaks exposed that brave whistleblowers stood up to a major deception that was trying to co-opt this organization to act as a tool of the U.S. government. It was WikiLeaks that first exposed the major trove of documents that detailed the OPCW scandal. And what has been the media's response there? Well, according to our media, the OPCW whistleblowers do not exist. If you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, the one time the New York Times has mentioned the OPCW whistleblowers, it comes at the bottom of an article on a different topic. And it's one sentence and it's in passing. And the article was a fawning profile of a group called Bellingcat. What is Bellingcat? It's another state-funded cutout that happens to always parrot claims against enemy states targeted by the U.S. government, whether it's Syria or Russia. And otherwise, the OPCW whistleblowers don't exist. And they don't exist because if you're to grapple with the facts that they revealed, they're incredibly damning. Those facts revealed that while the Trump administration was accusing Syria of committing a chemical attack in Duma and then bombing Syria, the reality on the ground was that OPCW investigators who went there found no evidence of a chemical attack, and their investigation was doctored. It was centered. Their findings were never released to the public. And instead, we got findings that completely deviated from what the actual people who went to Syria found on the ground. And so to grapple with those facts is to expose a major pro-war deception in which a fake chemical attack allegation was lodged against Syria, in which the U.S. government bombed Syria on false grounds. And then, to justify that, the world's premier chemical watchdog organization was co-opted to prevent the truth from getting out to the public. And incidentally, there's a history of this, when the OPCW has been compromised to justify a U.S. military intervention. It happened in 2002, when Joseph Bustani, the first head of the OPCW, was trying to bring Iraq into the Chemical Weapons Convention. And doing that would have subjected Iraq to the inspections regime of the OPCW. But that posed a problem for people in Washington, because if there were inspections going on in Baghdad, that would have foiled the war plans that were being hatched in Washington, D.C., in the White House. So John Bolton went to the OPCW and told Joseph Bustani that basically you have to resign. You have to leave. And Joseph Bustani refused, said, no, I was elected, I just got elected to a new mandate, to another 5-year term, I'm staying. And so John Bolton said, well, you know what, we know where your kids live. And even then, Joseph Bustani refused to step down. So John Bolton went back to Washington, and they engineered basically a coup where they threatened to withhold the OPCW's budget unless enough member states voted to oust Joseph Bustani. And that's what happened. Joseph Bustani was voted out after enough member states either didn't support him or were sufficiently intimidated to going along with the U.S. So fast forward, close to 20 years later, and the OPCW is again being compromised. And again, by the way, this happened under the watch of John Bolton. because John Bolton's first day on the job in the Trump administration, when he came back to serve our country, was when the Trump administration was deciding how to respond to the alleged chemical attack in Duma. So John Bolton has gotten to continue his work compromising the OPCW to justify U.S. military strikes against disobedient states. And Joseph Bustani, by the way, he has a tie to this scandal because these OPCW whistleblowers are so experienced with the OPCW that their tenure actually coincides with Joseph Bustani, the first Director General of the OPCW 2 decades ago. So recently, when Joseph Bustani wanted to testify in front of the UN in support of these whistleblowers, the Trump administration blocked his testimony. They vetoed a measure to get him to speak. So once again, Joseph Bustani is being silenced to justify a pro-war deception. And what has the media done in response to all of this? It's as if none of this exists. The story does not exist in their pages. If you look at a reporter named Joby Warwick, he's the Washington Post reporter on national security, he wrote a whole book recently called Red Line. It's about Syria, the OPCW, and chemical weapons. Came out last year. You'd think, God, a book about Syria, the OPCW, and chemical weapons. What a perfect time to talk about the OPCW whistleblower scandal. Well, guess where Joby Warwick ends his book? It covers many years, the Ghouta attack in 2013, Khan Sheikhoun in 2017. And he ends the book, conveniently, at the Duma incident in 2018, when he says, Syria committed a chlorine attack in 2018, and the OPCW later confirmed that it was the Syrian government that did it. The end. That's the end of his book. So he ended his book conveniently at a time when he wouldn't have to mention what came afterwards, which is the massive OPCW scandal that exposed all of that to be a fraud. And as I was saying, this extends not just to people like Joby Warwick, but to our adversarial media as well. And this speaks to why genuine adversarial outlets like CovertAction Magazine are so important. I'll give one example. The Intercept, founded by the billionaire Piero Midiar, founded by a lot of great people on a promising mission to do real adversarial journalism, founded with the leaks of Edward Snowden, which totally exposed state crimes. The Intercept has never acknowledged the OPCW whistleblower's existence. It's only published articles that promote the Trump administration line on Syria and Duma, which say that a chemical attack did happen. And taking this back to the attack on me in The Guardian, when I read this study that claimed I was the biggest purveyor of disinformation on Syria, I was reading it, and saw, I know that this think tank behind it is funded by the U.S. and UK. Their partner on the report is something called the Syria Campaign. That's funded by an oil tycoon who is one of the largest funders of the Syrian opposition. But going to the back of the page, there is a credit when it gives specific credit for who gave support to this report. And one of the groups that funded this report is called Luminate Strategic Initiatives. Well, what is Luminate Strategic Initiatives? It's an NGO funded by Piero Midiar, the billionaire funder of the Intercept. So it's a dark time right now where not even our corporate media, which has always done the bidding of those in power, are acting as stenographers, but even our adversarial sites that are supposed to be there to expose state crimes, not cover for them, are doing that bidding as well. And that's because, as is the case with the Intercept, it's funded by someone who's also funding propaganda that goes after journalists who are exposing state crimes like myself. So that speaks to me the importance of an outlet like CovertAction Magazine, who has been doing this work for so long, has been laying down a tradition that is a model for all of us to follow, and something that we all need to support for our democracy, or what's left of it, to continue. So thanks very much for having me.
Okay. Thank you so much, Aaron. That's incredible work that you're doing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn to, although we can't have my dad here today live in person, how about we thought we would show a video of my father, Philip Agee. How does that sound? Does that sound good?
The CIA, from the very beginning, at least as early as 1951, has used the information that it has collected.
These clips come from mostly interviews of my father in the mid-1970s for a documentary called On Company Business, which is a 3-part it's like some 6 hours or something, of covert action, intervention, all kinds of terrorism, torture. And my father was interviewed and helped put that documentary together. It's called On Company Business. You could see it by going to our YouTube site. You can watch it. And what we really need to do is we need to update that, because that was shown first in 1977, and we need to update that work now and talk and show the covert actions that have gone on since then. All right? So why don't we turn to my father, Philip Agee. Let's take a look.
Use of front organizations, for example, beginning at least as early as 1951, has used the information that it has collected. And it has used the information in order to penetrate and to manipulate the institutions of power in whatever country it is operating in order to influence the course of events in those countries. And essentially this boils down to propping up those forces which are considered to be the friendly forces, and in penetrating, dividing, weakening, and ultimately destroying those forces which are considered to be the enemy forces. The institutions of power which are penetrated and attempts are made to manipulate them are the political parties, the security services, the military institutions, the trade union organizations especially, the youth and student movements, cultural organizations, professional societies, and in a very big way, the public information media. One of the principal mechanisms which the CIA used after World War II in its programs to influence the course of events in different countries was the use of front organizations. For example, in the youth field, the CIA set up the World Assembly of Youth, which continues today with its headquarters in Brussels. In the student field, the CIA set up the Coordinating Secretariat of National Unions of Students. In the trade union field, the CIA founded, or helped to found, the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions with its headquarters in Brussels, which continues to exist today. The purpose of all these different activities, the political and the front organizations in the different sectors of the population, were to fill this political vacuum that existed after World War II, and to fill it with those forces which would be favorable to close relations with the United States, the so-called Atlantic Alliance, and in order to preclude any participation in these organizations and in the political life by left-wing forces such as the communist parties. It was to shove them aside and to isolate them so that development of Europe for as many generations as possible could be brought under the control of those forces which are friendliest to the United States and to the interest of our corporations, which were moving in part and parcel with the reconstruction of Europe after World War II. The CIA works through the reactionary forces, essentially, or the middle roading or the social democratic forces, whichever ones they're trying to support. They work through these people. In the CIA, there is a distinction made between the career U.S. citizen employees, like I was, that is the officers and staff, and the people who actually do the work at the end of the line, who are the agents. At any one time, down in Ecuador, we had on our payroll or in an intimate working relationship with our station, one vice president, a president of the Chamber of Deputies, a president of the Senate, a vice president of the Senate, a number of senators, a number of deputies, the Secretary General of the Democratic Socialist Party. We even created a party down there which we called the Popular Revolutionary Liberal Party, which would appeal to a lot of different people. We had extensive propaganda operations during this period also. The outstanding liberal columnist of the country, Gustavo Salgado, who wrote for El Comercio, which was one of the principal dailies, under pen names, working for us, writing up our material and publishing it as if it were his own. We would publish small notices which would be practically hysterical outcries against the growth of communism in Ecuador or a specific issue such as the visit of diplomats from some communist country. Our participation consisted in creating the conditions of fear and at times hysteria with regard to the growth of the left-wing political organizations in Ecuador, such as the communist organizations, and the fear with regard to the...
We made it work. We made it work, y'all. That's what's important. That is the spirit we have here at CovertAction Magazine, to keep the information coming no matter what. So either way, I have a few things I want to say before we introduce our next speaker. For everyone who is on our live stream that's tuning in, thank you all so much for being here with us. Even though you can't be physically with us, you are here with us, supporting the work. And I just want to remind anyone who's watching, part of what we're doing today is trying to keep the work of CovertAction Magazine alive. So if you are tuning in, please, 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 you can go to the website, CovertAction Magazine, CovertAction Magazine, and you can donate and you can give money to support what we're doing here today. We really appreciate it. Any amount is not too small, whether it's something that you go off and you buy a coffee with it, whatever it is, you know, take that one coffee, take that one thing and say, I want to put this towards independent journalism. That's real journalism. That's putting out in the world the kind of stories that must be told in this time and in this era. So please do that if you are able to. Either way, I'm going to move into our next guest, who I'm very excited to join us. We're going to figure out technologically here in this space how it's going to work. We're hoping we're going to be able to really hear it, but he just has to be nice and loud and make sure that we can hear all of the great things he's going to say. We're going to be joined now virtually by Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern is a former, yes, definitely those applause. Ray McGovern is a former Central Intelligence Agency officer who was turned into a political activist. He was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990. And in the 1980s, he chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and prepared the President's Daily Brief. There's so much more to Ray. You just have to let him be the one to tell you. So we're going to get this all set up for you. Welcome to the
Ray, can you? Oh. Ray, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
You can, okay, good. Well, thanks for having me and congratulations on the 44th anniversary. I realize that a film clip has just been played of Phil. Has that happened? Okay, I can't get an answer. I'll just say that
Yes, that happened. That happened.
It did. Okay, I previewed that film and I noticed that there was one category of people that we are all falling into by virtue of participating here. And that is the subversive control watch list. So if you're not already on it, ipso facto, you'll be on it now. I want to start with just 5 seconds of silence in honor of my good friend and good friend of CovertAction Magazine, David McMichael, who died 2 months ago. David was an incredible fellow. Among other things, he introduced me to Robert Parry, which began my journalist career outside of the agency. I spent 27 years as a kind of glorified newspaper person writing current intelligence for the president. And what I like to do is just stress here that when you talk about covert action, secrecy, of course, is all important. Secrecy against the foes abroad, but also to make it happen, you got to have secrecy inside the government, as John Kiriakou has pointed out. And what we have now is secrecy that is unaccountable to anyone. We have so-called oversee committees, right? The oversee committee is supposed to look at what covert actions are being taken place. And they're in effect overlook committees. They look over, but they don't see. I'll give you an example. Grassley, Senator Grassley from Iowa. He's been chair of the Judiciary Committee for 155 years, I think. Maybe it's less than that. But, you know, when this lawyer from the FBI was convicted of perjury in falsifying a FISA application, Grassley took to Twitter. Yeah, Grassley wrote a tweet and he said, whoa, I'm not surprised that this lawyer is not getting 1 day of jail time. That's the way it is with the Department of Just Us. Grassley, it's a Department of Just Us. Okay, so there you get it. Here's a guy who's supposed to be overseeing all this, and he's laughing about the fact that the Department of Justice is just us. And even if Grassley thought that a stronger penalty should have been imposed on this crooked lawyer, he had no power to do it. Theoretically, the CIA, as has been indicated by Phil, if that clip included this, is to execute the policy of the president, right? Remember that. It's not supposed to develop the policy, it's supposed to execute what the president decides to do. It's not supposed to execute presidents, but it did. 16 years into its existence, with a lot of help from other, what the Russians called, security services. They did in John Kennedy. Now, if you don't believe me, there are two books that I suggest strongly that you read. One is by James Douglas, JFK and the Unspeakable. And the other is by my friend Peter Janney, Mary's Mosaic. As many of you will know, Peter's father was involved in the cover-up of the killing of Mary Meyer. Mary Meyer was one of JFK's closest friends. You ought to read that book. When I read it, I was I was appalled on several counts. Peter's father happened to be my first boss, Fred Janney. He was always a peculiar duck. He must have been carrying a lot in his conscience, assuming he had one. So let me get to the reasons why the CIA and in the person of Allen Dulles thought they had to do away with John Kennedy. He was an upstart. He was not part of the establishment. And when they presented the Bay of Pigs escapade to him, he said, really? You think you can do this? And oh, yeah, we could do it. And there'll be an uprising and you get rid of Castro. So reluctantly, JFK acquiesced and he said, look, just remember, now take this down. No US armed forces are going to be involved in this caper at all. If you call on them, they're not coming. Now, Dulles and his friends sort of say, oh, right, sure. But we know that this was part of the plan that JFK would be forced to employ US forces. And we know that from coffee-stained notes in Allen Dulles' desk when he died. This is what they said. When the chips were down, JFK would be forced by the, quote, realities of the situation to provide whatever military support was necessary, quote, rather than permit the enterprise to fail, the enterprise being get rid of Castro. So there it was, in writing. The historian who includes this in his book is Lucien Vanderbroek. You don't have to believe me. So the Bay of Pigs was really, really important. And what it revealed to me was the answer to a very puzzling question. Because when I entered the CIA, I came into this glorified officers program, Junior Officer Training Corps program, and that was April 1963. In July 1963, we were treated to a lecture by one of the people in covert operations. And this fellow just reamed into Kennedy, the sitting president, telling us he was a coward, he was a traitor, he would let the Soviets run the world, and he was awful. And I thought this really odd, I thought this really strange. As a matter of fact, I remember making a little note. This guy would kill Kennedy if he had the chance. That was July 1963. I wish I could remember who it was. I think it may have been Howard Hunt, E. Howard Hunt. In any case, that was my first exposure to the crazies. What happened? They did do it. And then Allen Dulles insinuated himself onto the Warren Commission to pretty much run it, run all the interviews and everything else, to cover the whole thing up. Long story short, it's still covered up. 5 years ago, President Trump tried to release the final documents because it's necessary to release them by law, by act of Congress. And he got up one morning and said, we're going to release the CIA and FBI documents this afternoon on JFK assassination. And then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he got up and said, oh, and he said this, Trump. And now the CIA and the FBI said, we can't release those. And we'll revisit it in 6 months. So McGovern makes a little note, 6 months, checks, nothing more comes of it. So what is it? It's coming up on 50 years of assassination. And all those documents are held secret, or if Gina Haspel had her way, she's probably destroyed them. That was the last thing. You get Gina Haspel in place as the director of the CIA. There's nothing that Trump could have done. And he tried. On his last day, he had a mound of documents that he said, I want these declassified. And Gina Haspel, torturer in chief of the first black site, said, didn't do it. So this is what covert action inside means. The other thing I'll just add, because I think I'm running out of time, is that this extends to covert action with our media. Now, it's very embarrassing, and hopefully some of you know this, that the Russiagate conspiracy was a conspiracy started by a woman named Hillary Clinton. And that's very clear now in court documents, in sworn testimony, and so forth. She launched this Russiagate thing before the election, carried it through after the election, and the president himself, Obama, was aware. There was no Russian hacking. That was the crucible at the beginning. The Russians hacked the DNC emails and then gave them to WikiLeaks. Didn't happen, folks. And everyone knew that. Everyone important knew that. In December of 2017. Why do I know that? Well, because finally, the House Intelligence Committee released the testimony of the head of the forensics firm, CrowdStrike was its name, who said there is no evidence, there is no technical evidence that anyone hacked those DNC emails that were so embarrassing to Hillary Clinton. No evidence that anyone hacked them, not the Russians, not anybody. We didn't see any emails leave electronically. So as we had been saying for 5 years, based on really good information from our NSA former technical directors, it was somebody with access to the DNC computers, put a little thumb drive or some external storage device in there and took it over, put it in their pocket, took it to where the WikiLeaks published it. Now, why is it that none of your co-citizens know that? Because the CIA and the security services, the other ones, told the New York Times, don't publish that. So when did I learn of it? Well, when Representative Schiff was required to release that testimony. When was that? That was May 7th, 2020. May 7th, 2020. Isn't that interesting? So Schiff hid it for 2.5 years. The New York Times, Washington Post has hid it for more than 2 more years. Will we ever see sworn testimony from the head of the forensics firm who looked at the DNC computers saying there was no hack by Russia or anyone else? So this is the insidious influence that the security services have on our media. The New York Times drinks from the trough that CIA sets up, and they get their guidance. And unless there are people like CovertAction Magazine and others I write for antiwar.com now. Consortium News is still great. There are a lot of good places where you can go for information, but some of the traditional sources, there's a reader-supported news, which is really gone downhill very sharply. And, you know, Amy Gooden hasn't let me on for 5 or 6 years because she didn't agree about the Russians and Watergate, the Russians and Russiagate. So it's really an uphill climb. And I'm just glad again for David McMichael introducing me to Robert Perry, setting me on a path to become a real journalist or to try to become a real journalist. I compliment you people at CovertAction Magazine. I hope you prosper and congratulations on your anniversary.
Incredible speakers, so much to share. I want to move into another one of our virtual speakers so that way we can really get them all out. There's so much to be said about this next speaker who will be joining us. She is an incredible journalist on so many different levels. Abby Martin. Abby Martin will be joining us. She's an investigative journalist and activist. She is the founder of Citizen Journalism Project, Media Roots. She's also the creator of the documentary and interview series, The Empire Files. She also hosts the podcast Dosed and Media Roots Radio. And she is also the director of the incredible documentary, which I really recommend people see, Gaza Fights for Freedom. She is also currently working on an anti-imperialist environmental documentary titled Earth's Greatest Enemy. So much great work from Abby. Let's give it up for her.
All right. There we go. Go ahead, Abby.
You're on.
Cool. Let me get situated here. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor to be included in this very important event to celebrate Covert Action as an essential publication to educate the masses about the extensive crimes of empire. For 44 years, Covert Action has shined a crucial light on the sinister depths the United States and its collaborators will go to enforce capitalism's world order at the expense of tens of millions of lives. Time and again, Covert Action has been one of the only publications that has been willing to tackle some of the most uncomfortable truths about deep state crimes against democracy, from CIA-backed political assassinations to false flag operations. It's been in the trenches for decades, unearthing the stories that the operatives and servants of empire want long hidden. And then in this new era of digital censorship and crackdown on dissidents, we need to support its work more than ever before. So I wanted to take this time to walk us through just a brief history of Covert Action and how it's brought us to the precipice between life and death that we face today. The national security state of 1947, which birthed the CIA, defines covert action as an activity of the US government to influence political, economic, or military conditions abroad, where it is intended that the role of the United States government will not be apparent or acknowledged publicly. It states that this expansion of secret warfare would include mass propaganda, paramilitary operations, and lethal force against anyone it deemed a threat. Now, of course, this was 2 years after the United States dropped nuclear weapons on the civilian populations of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, cementing its position as the global hegemon at the end of World War II. And even though it would long continue to advance its imperial ambitions through open military aggression, brutal coups, and devastating wars, it understood that it needed to foster another tentacle of control, one immune from scrutiny. These unaccountable intelligence agencies have committed horrific atrocities in our names ever since, with plausible deniability. You know, empires in the past, of course, were very open about their conquest while putting masses of people under their control. We're going to take over your land. We're going to become the new governors of your system, and we're going to subjugate you as slaves. There was no shame about colonization in times of feudalism and colonialism. The United States even used to be proud about its imperial ambitions. As its territorial empire expanded, US politicians actually wanted to rename this country Imperial America because the term United States no longer made sense based on the land it controlled. But throughout the 20th century, of course, all of this changed. Mass consciousness exploded. People yearning to be free threw off their chains. Waves of anti-colonialism and revolution swept through the world. Those at the reins of power had to adapt quickly. You could no longer be a proud empire. Countries like the US, Britain, France had to contrast themselves with the burgeoning socialist and independent countries that showed us there was a different way. They had to insist that communism was a totalitarian evil that threatened freedom and that they were the true leaders of liberty and democracy. Of course, throughout the decades, what could only be described as sheer barbarism was committed, from Vietnam to Chile, killing tens of millions to stave off any semblance of sovereignty, to obliterate the hope of any country from paving their own future, their own path, independent of the United States empire. Much of this was done through the insidious mechanisms of the CIA. When mass propaganda efforts failed, when economic and political subversion failed, they sent in the jackals, take out the leaders, install the puppets that would bow to the dictates of multinational corporations. Brutal terrorism was unleashed on entire countries by US-backed and trained right-wing death squads that targeted poor people, peasants, farmers, students, all in the name of fighting communism. Most of this history remains untaught, unknown, and vastly underreported. Covert Action founder and ex-CIA officer Philip Agee left the agency over one of these operations, known as the Tlatelolco massacre in Mexico in 1968, where CIA-backed snipers opened fire on unarmed protesters, killing hundreds in a crackdown against political opposition to the US-backed ruling party. Of course, as we know, he went on to expose the great lengths this agency had gone to plot psychological and paramilitary terrorism against communist students at Mexico's universities. His work from there became an invaluable asset to understand the machinations of the CIA. During the Cold War, those at the helm, of course, were very open about the threat communism posed to their economic domination. But the empire became much more sophisticated to survive in a changing world. So it began to cloak its goals in the doublespeak of humanitarianism and liberal interventionism, using NATO to bomb Yugoslavia for human rights, or kill 500,000 children with sanctions in Iraq to advance democracy. It poured billions of dollars into CIA cutout agencies like the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID to foment regime change in countries like Cuba and Venezuela. Even NED co-founder Alan Weinstein admitted as such in 1991 in a very telling interview where he said a lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA. But the growth of empire stagnated. And at just the time when the US wanted to deploy a new project of imperial conquest across the Middle East and beyond to reinvigorate and rebuild its immense military apparatus and national security state, came 9/11, the greatest gift they ever got. Just in the last 2 decades, a never-ending horror unleashed from the war on terror has forcibly ejected up to 84 million people from their homes. This is according to the UN, causing a devastating refugee crisis that has put fascism on the rise across Europe and elsewhere. That is more people forced to flee than the populations of Iraq and Afghanistan combined. And while reports from the cost of war claim that only 1 million people have been killed as a direct result of fighting in these arenas, the Geneva Declaration on Armed Violence and Development describes that for every direct death in war, the burden of indirect deaths is between 3 and 15 times higher due to the destruction of public health infrastructure and lack of basic services. So just how many have been killed? How many have been disabled? How many whose lives have been changed forever from this brutal trauma, the loss of their family, of their friends? It's incalculable, and it's so difficult to wrap your mind around. It's been said that the death of one, of course, is a tragedy, and the death of 1 million a statistic. And this really couldn't be truer when we think about such a profound and incomprehensible loss in our names. Despite all of this, the US empire has gone through a complete rebrand in a post 9/11 world. It tries to hide the fact that it even is an empire. Very little Americans know of its vast expanse of 1,000 military bases around the world and what those bases do to destroy the planet and people they impose upon. The CIA's crimes are looked at as a thing of the past. They don't do those things anymore. Instead, they do necessary counterintelligence to fight terrorism and keep us safe. These agencies are good, and they deserve our reverence and respect. Privileged Americans are completely clueless that these covert wars not only continue, but they've expanded. A recent costs of war study reveals US counterterrorism operations have been active in 83 countries in the last 3 years. However, today the US doesn't even have to militarily engage because it relies mostly on hybrid warfare methods of mass propaganda and economic control through the use of sanctions, which they call soft power. But sanctions kill exactly the same as conventional warfare, with barely any media coverage or political accountability. After 9/11, this system of financial weaponry grew with extreme precision. The Patriot Act granted the Treasury unprecedented powers to sever ties between US economic infrastructure, which most of the world relies upon, and entire national jurisdictions. From 2000 to 2001, the use of sanctions have increased nearly 1,000%, with leaders from both parties using them as the primary method to force countries to fall in line. According to Sanctions Kill, US sanctions now affect 1/3 of humanity, with more than 8,000 measures impacting 42 countries. The institutionalization of covert action sophisticated the empire's global propaganda machine. It sells the story of American exceptionalism to every child and ingrains militarism and capitalism as our religion. It conditions the masses into accepting and even being proud of our role as empire babies, overseeing mass murder, normalizing the daily violence and subjugation of others. The corporate domination of our media manufactures our consent to these crimes while offering us the illusion of choice and the freedom of the press. It used to be nearly impossible to break through the information barrier of these elite stenographers. But CovertAction and others have been on the front lines, chipping away, exposing the ugly truths that show what this country really is and what it really represents. The internet advanced these efforts, terrified the establishment by empowering average people to uplift their own narratives. That's why we've seen a new wave of censorship take root. Censorship by proxy. Silicon Valley tech overlords comply with the goals of the state without any mandate to ban unsavory viewpoints, algorithmically erase investigative journalism, marginalize dissenting voices, and financially strangle outlets that don't toe the line. This prohibition of views and curation of our reality is for our own good, they say. We say how powerful the message is, the sway of the messenger when it comes to issues like Russia's war in Ukraine, how it can cultivate collective outrage overnight to make war a uniform horror, a reality everyone's stunned by. But those of us paying attention know that war is a permanent state. And those who subsidize and control the message, the arms industry and the Pentagon, will not tolerate a modicum of truth about our wars, our crimes, our torture, our abuse. And that is why we must band together in this age of repression. We must unite. We must lift each other's voices and work up. We have to use the tools available to us while we still can to share this information, to educate those who will listen, to organize an actual resistance to empire, one rooted in international solidarity. Covert action is a crucial arm of this movement. We must force an anti-imperialist agenda that those at the top have to follow because they have no choice, because it is no longer a choice. We cannot rest until we force the empire to lift its death grip on humanity and to crumble into darkness. Please, everyone watching, I urge you, go to Covert Action today, become a sustaining donor to keep this kind of reporting alive. Thank you so much for including me in this very important event.
Great! Yeah, way to go!
All right. Wow, powerful. That was so powerful. Thank you so much, Abby. Oh, gosh. It's very, very moving, what you have spoken about, Abby. Thank you so much. So true what Abby has said. It was connecting with me very deep. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on now to Christian Parenti. Christian, thank you for showing up. Is a professor of economics at John Jay College. Yeah, give him a round of applause. Christian Parenti. Okay, professor of economics at John Jay College, City University of New York. His books are Radical Hamilton. Look up the rest of and he has reported extensively from Afghanistan, Iraq, and various parts of Africa, Asia, and Latin America for The Nation, Fortune, the London Review of Books, the New York Times, Playboy, and other publications. Let's give another round of applause for Christian Parenti. Go ahead. All right.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here. Being part of this really fantastic lineup of John Kuriaku, Ray McGovern, and Aaron Monte. These are people I really respect. I'm going to keep my comments very short. We were asked to talk about the importance of covert action, the subject, as a way, of course, of highlighting the importance of CovertAction Magazine so that we all pony up and help out. So in thinking about the importance of covert action, I thought of the state of exception, the idea of the state of emergency, which, thanks to a book by the Italian political philosopher Giorgio Agamben, over the last maybe 15 years, this idea has become, has a little traction in academia. And Agamben's argument about what we would call the state of emergency, which he calls the state of exception, is that in liberal democracy, in all of the liberal democratic constitutions, there is this clause that allows for the suspension of the constitution itself. So his reading of Nazi Germany was that it was actually, you could say, it was a constant 12-year-long legal constitutional hiatus from the constitutional order. And his point is that this is a very dangerous feature of liberal democracy because it can lead to the undoing of liberal democracy, and we should be cautious of this and pushing against it. And when I read the book, I thought, well, another clever European theorist. But the COVID pandemic has made me take it much more seriously. Covert action, the practice, not the magazine, relates to the question of the state of emergency because it, like the state of emergency, is also a legal, hidden in plain sight opening for the illegality and unaccountability of the state. And like the problem of the state of emergency, it threatens to get out of hand. In fact, it threatens the very viability of democracy. So, in other words, I think sometimes a lot of people are concerned about covert action, but it can seem rather esoteric, that it's about these specific cases, which it is, of course, right? Julian Assange's case is about this man and what he's done and the details and drama of that case. But it's also always about the risk of the illegality of the state getting out of hand. Another way that covert action is like the state of emergency is that they both reveal the ruling class, the capitalist ruling class's relationship to democracy, which is that they will use it, they will tolerate it, up to a point. And they reserve the right, hidden in plain sight, in the form of the state of emergency clause and the existence of covert operations and the agencies that pursue them. They reserve the right to step out of legality and to suspend all of the conceits that are liberal democracy. So it's important to, in other words, the work of CovertAction Magazine is not just esoteric and inside political baseball. It actually is driving directly at what I believe is one of the greatest threats to the existence of democracy right now in this country. So how does this relate to the pandemic? This is not going to be popular with some of you, but let's be honest. The COVID, the evidence is becoming overwhelming that the COVID virus came from the lab in Wuhan. What's the backstory there? Well, the backstory is that there was gain-of-function research going on in the U.S. Scientists, in the name of national security, to defend this research was also very closely bound up with chemical weapons and biological weapons research, all of which is illegal unless, of course, you're trying to defend against biological weapons. So gain-of-function research was so out of control that by 2013, a group of about 30 scientists wrote to the Obama administration and said, this has to be controlled. One of the main epicenters was in the labs of Ralph Barrick at North Carolina. And they said, we've got to stop doing this. There's not enough oversight. The Obama administration, to its credit, more or less shut down most gain-of-function research in the U.S., but there was a loophole. U.S. government money could be passed through certain nonprofits, in particular EcoHealth Alliance, to continue this research overseas. And so some of this research was transferred to Ukraine, and some of it was transferred to Wuhan. And what happened at Wuhan was that money from the U.S. government passed through EcoHealth Alliance, went to the Wuhan lab, and I do not think there was an intentional release or anything like that. There was a mistake, and the virus escaped. The pandemic begins. So in other words, the virus itself, that escape, is born of covert action. That research was a type of covert action. It was done secretly. It was done on the DL. It was done through cutouts. And it was done in deliberate evasion of the democratic controls of the state. And it was justified legally in terms of defense, right? They got around the fact that it was illegal to do this kind of research, except that, we can do it to defend against it. Then what's the reaction? Well, the reaction is the state of emergency, the state of exception, as Agamben would put it. The undemocratic suspension of civil liberties and the lockdown of daily life and all of the terrible consequences that went with that. Along the way, something else happened, which was the left, or too much of the left, seemed to turn its back on civil liberties. And this is highly problematic for a number of reasons. The main one for our purposes today is that it is through civil liberties that the work of opposing covert action takes place. Often people think of civil liberties just in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, but there's also the Fourth Amendment protections against undue search and seizure. There's the 14th Amendment protections against equal protection before the law. And part of how covert action, which is like the state of emergency, is essentially a cancer cell, a totalitarian cancer cell that threatens to kill democracy itself, that exists within the democratic order. That the struggle against that cancer cell, those two cancer cells, let's say, is the embrace of, the use of, the expansion of civil liberties. And historically speaking, it has been the left that has pioneered this. Most of the key legal cases that made our civil liberties realities were led by anarchists, communists, socialists. And somehow we've gotten to the point where many on the left treat civil liberties as if it's a right-wing issue. And I think that is disastrous, and we need to push back against that. And we need to connect the protection of civil liberties and the exercising of our civil liberties to the preservation of democracy and to the struggle against covert action, which is the cancer cell in the body politic that threatens to destroy democracy itself. And that's why the work of this magazine is so important. So thank you very much.
Wait for you to ask questions. All right. Okay. Maybe at the end we can do that. That would be good. Let's go here to our next speaker, Jeff. Jeff Young is a United States Kentucky Democrat running on the 6th Kentucky congressional seat against Republican Andy Barr and in the 2022 United States House of Representatives elections, and as a Democrat in the election. Young is running on the platform Abolish the CIA. Let's give a round of applause for Jeff Young. All right, come on up, Jeff.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Young, and unlike Andy Barr, I will never vote to send weapons to Nazis. That's been my main campaign slogan so far in the primary. Primary was May 17th, and I won it fairly narrowly by 52 to 48% against one opponent. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about Ukraine and other places, but primarily, what's going on now is Ukraine. So I've been researching this issue for a long time and using information sources such as CovertAction Magazine and a couple dozen others that I will mention at the end of my time here. Real aggressors in Eastern Europe since 2014 have been primarily the United States. We're talking about the Maidan coup in 2014, violent coup, overthrew the elected government there in Ukraine. NATO, which has supported the coup government, and groups of Ukrainian Nazis that the United States has been arming, training, and setting loose on Russian-speaking Ukrainians and ethnic Russian Ukrainians, mainly in the Donbass in southeastern Ukraine. So we have been the aggressors, U.S., NATO, groups of Ukrainian Nazis. Now, I've never said that Nazis are the majority of the population of Ukraine. They're not. But they have the weapons, the heavy weapons, and they're more than willing to use it. So during the period from 2014 to today, they have used their weapons to take over the government. So since 2014, Ukraine has not been a democracy at all. There has been no democracy to defend. It's been a totalitarian dungeon and run primarily by the U.S. State Department, the CIA, the Pentagon, and the Nazis. So on March 15th of this year, all 100 U.S. senators voted to find and declare that President Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. Now, when a body of the legislature of a country declares that, it doesn't necessarily have any legal impact. It might, but it doesn't necessarily have that. And then shortly after that, the House and Senate voted to send $40 billion more in weapons to the Ukrainian government to try to fight the Russians. I would have been the only Democrat to vote against that $40 billion aid package in the House or the Senate. There were no Democrats who voted against it. There are a few Republicans, far too few to endanger the passage of that aid package, so-called aid. So the 100 senators voted to declare Putin a war criminal. I was reading articles as early as March of this year not in the mainstream press, but from various sources, saying that Article 51 of the UN Charter, which is the basis, the Charter itself is the basis of international law today. Article 51 talks about the allowable use of force in self-defense. So if Russia was defending its own population and territory against attack or imminent attack, and collective self-defense, which would include the Russian citizens and the Russian-speaking ethnic Russians there in Donetsk and Lugansk against ongoing attack. 8 years of shelling by the Ukrainian government of these breakaway republics. And it seemed to me at the time that Russia was entirely justified, legally and morally, to launch its military operation in Ukraine to defend Russian people, defend the possibility of Ukraine becoming a huge NATO base chock full of missiles, armor, artillery pointed at Russia. And if the Ukrainian army had conquered southeastern Ukraine, they might have just gone on into Russia to see how far they could get before getting a reaction. All right, so I had the privilege of going to MIT in the 70s and taking a couple of classes with Noam Chomsky in 1976. First one was U.S. foreign policy after World War II, post-1945. One of the things he said in that class is, don't accept what any particular person says, like Marx, don't be a Marxist, don't repeat just everything that I say, research it yourself and come to your own conclusions and then engage in debate. So I remembered that. On April 23rd, 2022, Daniel Kovalik wrote an article in RT, and it was titled, "Why Russia's Intervention in Ukraine is Legal Under International Law." He teaches human rights at the University of Pittsburgh Law School. So he put that out there. It's a well-written article. You can find it. Then on June 16th, 2022, my former professor, Noam Chomsky, was interviewed by David Barsamian. And what Noam was saying was reprinted in the article. The first 7 paragraphs described in detail all of these provocations that the United States, NATO, had been inflicting upon Russia. All these things I just mentioned. And okay. But then the 8th paragraph, Noam said, on February 24th, Putin invaded, a criminal invasion. These serious provocations provide no justification of it. So I wondered immediately, well, how did he get to that conclusion? There was no discussion, there was no analysis of why Article 51 of the UN Charter did not apply in the Ukraine situation. So Daniel Kovalik, many other legal experts, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal expert, but we disagree. And what Noam Chomsky said in cases like this, where there's a disagreement about a serious issue which has major implications, is, well, publish your position, get it published in a peer-reviewed journal, and let the process of debate happen. So I talked to Daniel Kovalik a couple days ago, and he is working on such an article, a kind of expansion of his RT thing, which was fairly short, He's working on it with other people, and I'm looking very closely to when that's published and to read what it says and see if there's any response from the side that says, well, obviously it's an illegal invasion. Russia sent tanks in, and it's obvious, you know. It just looks like an invasion, walks like an invasion. Okay, so so I'm not elected to anything yet. I'm the Democratic nominee in Kentucky's 6th congressional district, but I'm going to make a demand as a citizen. I am demanding, I'm going to put it on a billboard. Pray for Ukraine to surrender to Russia as soon as possible. Pray for that. Why? Because it's the quickest, most elegant, most reliable way to stop the bloodshed. Just surrender. Let Russia figure out what to do. Allow elections in certain parts of Ukraine and so on, and just get out of there. Get all our troops out, from nearby. Get all of our weapons out, stop that $40 billion and send them back, send the weapons back to this country, and just back off. Just back off. Okay. Now, is it time up?
Yep.
Okay.
If you want to say
yeah, I wanted to call this speech, I'll skip that, say that in a different speech, and say, research things yourself, look for alternative media sources, and I'm going to list a few. CovertAction Magazine, Media Roots Radio, The Empire Files, Noam Chomsky, anything he writes or interviews he gives. Caitlin Johnstone, my favorite blogger in the world, Australian. Alex Christoforou, Alexander Mercouris, Colonel Douglas McGregor, super military analyst, tremendous experience. Larry Johnson, same thing. Andrei Martyanov, The Saker, or The Vineyard of the Saker, Moon of Alabama, Black Agenda Report, Black Alliance for Peace, Antiwar.com, which is the libertarian viewpoint. It's anti-war and it's conservative. That's fine. Fine with me. If they're pro-peace, that's fine. Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, the best fact-checking organization I know about. All the others are junk. Jimmy Dore and Friends. He's really good and he's popular. The Gray Zone. Max Blumenthal, Benjamin Norton, Aaron Mate, Stephen Lendman, Chris Hedges, and Michael Hudson, an economist who actually, puts my economic education to shame because of his perspective and his knowledge on international economic relations. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we are so happy you all could come out here and be with us today. We are wrapping up our program, and we're very happy to wrap up our program with one of our own who's on our editorial board. He has so many great words for you and great things to say. Joining us is Sam Alcoff he's a producer with Democracy Now!, and he's just incredible in all ways, shape, and form. Thank you so much, Sam.
All lives. Can y'all hear me in the back? Can y'all hear me? Okay, that's good. I almost lost my voice yesterday trying to fight the patriarchy. I want to draw attention to two people here. One of which is Chris Agee, who's sitting right next to me. But the other one is, hold your applause 1 second, Jeremy Kuzmarov. Can you just stand up right now? Jeremy,
stand up.
it's Jeremy Kuzmarov, the managing editor, and Chris Agee of CovertAction. And they deserve your applause because of all of the work that they do. And all week I've been trying to think, how do we describe what Jeremy and Chris and the rest of the people who are putting together CovertAction what they're pulling off. And I was thinking of phrases like, should we call it subsistence journalism, like hand-to-mouth reporting? It's like poverty reporting. If people knew how much they were trying to pull off with the budget that we're working with. The CIA agent watching it and that surveillance camera right there would write a check to Covert Action to preserve his own job security, right? But it's not funny, it's serious, right? I want us to take a second and step back and imagine a giant wall, right? It's pretty easy with this big-ass wall behind us, right? And we hear this terrible churn behind it, this awful noise. And we see survivors coming out from behind that wall. We hear the death count of what's happening behind that wall. And then we have little drips, little leaks coming off over the side of that wall, right? And those leaks, some of them come from people whose names we now know, people like Benny, people like Daniel Hale, people like Snowden, people like Assange, right? And they come up with all kinds of weird language. We hear bits and pieces of what's going on. Prism, Mainway, JSOC, Five Eyes, X Key Score, Turbine. They tell us about what's happening behind that wall where we hear this awful noise, but we don't have the full picture. And the point of Covert Action as a media project is for us to crack that wall, to put a hole in that wall, and to eventually bring that wall down. That is why we're doing Covert Action. And let's be honest, Covert Action is not a vanity project by a billionaire who's trying to get his little libertarian credentials or something, right? We're not a global independent news project that, you know, is 1,000 miles wide, but sometimes only an inch deep, right? We're not the mainstream press that has huge budgets for long-term journalism, long-term reporting, long-form journalism with deep reporting teams, but they always manage to bury the lead or not mention the key facts, right? Covert Action, as a media project, has an anti-imperialist posture that is asking questions about what is happening in Covert Action and who it serves and who it inflicts damage on. That's what it's about, right? It's true. As all of our speakers today have alluded to, this is more important than ever, right? We know we all have questions. When Gustavo Petro gets elected in Colombia, we want to know, what is U.S. Southern Command planning right now? What's AFRICOM doing? Do you trust Pierre Omidyar to do the reporting on that for you? When we see an upsurge in insurgency, what are the lessons of counterinsurgency that we should be talking to about activists in the United States and around the world in 2022? These are serious questions. The stakes for these questions are high, right? We know what happened to Chris's dad, getting hounded around the world. We know about Edward Snowden being in political exile in Russia. And we know that this very moment, naked in a jail cell in England, Julian Assange is being held. The national security state knows what the stakes are, and we need to know what the stakes are as well, right? We need your help. Let's just be real honest about that. We need your help writing. We need your help copy editing, giving us feedback, spreading the news around. You could be on the Zoom, the YouTube, watching this right now. You could be on this rooftop. We are reaching out to you because we need your help. This kind of work takes tools and resources cost money. And so I want to thank Josh. I want to thank Chris. I want to thank Rachel, new Chris, everybody else, Mike Locker, everybody who's come out, who's part of the Covert Action team for what they're doing today. And we are reaching out to everybody who's watching this online and who's here. Thank you for coming out. There is so much more work that needs to be done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam, for that. And with that, we are going to conclude our program for the anniversary celebration fundraiser support coming together that we've had today. Thank you all so much for being here. And like Sam said, please get involved one way or another. We need writers, we need your voices, we need your participation to make this project a success and to break down that wall, as Sam said. So please get to know each other. Take this time to talk to each other. Take this time to understand what it is that we all have to bring to the table, because we're going to do this together. Thank you all.
All right, very good.